Great to have you here. Today we're going to learn about the mixer, which is the place where music goes from good to great. The mixer is more than just a tool for polishing our sound. It can add new effects, balance a song, and it's the last of the 4 major panels in FL Studio. So if you're ready, let's jump right in. If you've been following our series for a while, then you know about Mirium First Beat, and we're going to want to open that project now. While you don't need to make a beat along with me to understand these concepts, it definitely helps in solidifying what you're learning. Regardless, to begin, we're going to want to open the mixer with either this button here or by using our F9 shortcut, which we can access by holding down Function on a Mac or Control on a PC and pressing F9. Let's just take a look around the mixer to start off. The first thing I'd recommend doing is going here to the mixer's menu, the small triangle that brings us to the menu of any of the window panes, and then goes to View, and then Track Inspector on the left side. See, I unclicked it, so now mine's on the right, but I recommend putting it on the left because it'll be the first thing your eyes look to when you look at the mixer. Let's take a closer look at that area that we just moved. This is called the Track Inspector. Now the Track Inspector gives details for whatever insert we've selected inside of the mixer. Here is a drop-down menu that can link an input device, such as a microphone, to this particular insert. Below this are several slots that can hold effects and plugins that will affect the sound that goes into the insert. For our purposes, let's think of effects as VSTs, remember that stands for Virtual Studio Technology, that take an insert's input, the sound going into it, and alter it in some way before that input can reach the insert here. So think of these effects as sitting right up here. Sound comes from either the playlist or the channel rack toward the mixer, but before it gets to this insert, an effect or one of our plugins will change the sound and then send it here. Once the sound is here inside of this insert, it's sent to the master track, and this is the last place that sound stops on its way to your speakers. So again, FL Studio, to an insert, there can be effects that affect the sound before it gets to the insert, from the insert to the master, from the master through your speakers. It's important to note that not all plugins have an effect on a sound as it goes into the mixer. One example of this can be a tuner plugin. By putting a tuner plugin onto an insert, we're only reading out the information of the sound that goes into that insert. In this case, with the tuner, the frequency of that sound. It's also important to note that when you have a track that's then sending here to the master, we should never try to send a sound past a track and straight to the master. This is going to make the process of editing that sound and being able to control exactly what's going through our speakers a lot harder. So any sound that we have should pass through an insert first and then make its way over to the master. Let's stop talking for a little while about what we can do to mixer inserts and start talking about the inserts themselves. The inserts here are numbered 1 going well into the hundreds, and each of them can receive an audio signal that it then sends somewhere else. If we want to change how our mixer inserts look, we can go to this triangle here in the top right corner and select different layouts. I personally prefer wide because it allows me to see every control that we could have on the exterior of the mixer. But if you're working on one screen or like a different look, it's completely up to you. Each insert has several controls. We'll go into each of those functions now. The decibel reader, which is right here, indicates how much signal is coming into a particular insert. The higher that this bar goes, then the more signal that insert has. If that goes too high and enters the red territory, then we're going to start experiencing distortion for that track, which will bleed over into the entire song. The master track has its own decibel reader, and this is the most important one to keep track of, because if this begins to hit the top, then we're going to experience effects like clipping, popping, and other things that we don't want to have in our song. To make sure this doesn't happen, we're always going to want to leave a little bit of extra space in our decibel readers. We call that extra space headroom. We'll go more into that when we start talking about more advanced mixing techniques, but for now, let's just make sure that the master decibel reader is always right about here. And with all of these tracks, let's definitely keep them lower than whatever our master's at. Finally, we have an enlarged decibel reader here, which is just a replica of whatever decibel reader we've selected already. Next, we have the swap stereo button right here, which swaps the left and right signals in our stereo. For now, this isn't super relevant to us. Then we have our fader slide. This essentially affects the amount of signal, which we might interpret as volume, coming out of an insert. Usually we have to lower these so that our master track stays at a level that will prevent distortion, like we were just talking about. The next button that we have here is the effects enabler, right here. When we start loading effects or plugins onto a mixer, which again would show up here, this button can engage or disengage the effects that we've put on, so we can hear the original signal and then the signal after it's been processed by those effects. Lastly, this little button here is called disc recording arming. We'll go into that in much greater detail during our recording tutorials, but for now it's important to know where it is. With all that being established, let's ensure that each of our sounds is being sent to its own individual mixer channel. Let's open up the channel rack and make sure that these numbers here on the left are all unique to each instrument. That means that the instruments themselves are being sent to their own individual mixer tracks, as opposed to going to the same one for two instruments. We want them to be individual so that we can have a greater sense of control over each of those sounds. Now, with the mixer open, let's play the pattern and see how the signal from each instrument routes to the mixer. Alright, well to my ears the clap sounds a little bit loud, so let's make sure that we turn it down. We see that the clap is being routed to right here, and I'm going to slide the fader down a bit so it's nice and quiet. Perfect. Now if you notice, we don't have a lot of room to turn the piano up if we wanted to. Let's see how high it goes. Well, we could max the slider out and hear how that works. This is typically bad practice. Instead, what we're going to want to do is we're going to turn everything else down so that the piano is relatively louder. At the bottom of each mixer insert is its send, which determines where the signal of this insert is going. As you can see, with almost any of our inserts, they're all going to the master track right now. But eventually, we're going to send some inserts to other inserts to achieve different functionality and effects. Let's have some fun and experiment with some effects. Select the FL Keys insert, which is here on insert 5, and here on slot 1, we're going to add in an effect. Right underneath Delay Reverb, we're going to choose Fruity Reverb 2. Let's click on that. So this adds reverb to our insert, and reverb is essentially an effect that makes a sound echo and resonate as if it were being played in a big room. Let's go to our song and make sure that we set our playhead to be just before the piano plays so that each time we press play, we get right to the piano. Let's hear what it sounds like with that reverb on it. So we're not really hearing the effects yet because we haven't turned up how much the effect is actually happening. So let's go back by clicking on it, and let's increase the wet signal. Now the wet signal is how much of the effect is playing through the insert, and the dry signal is the original sound. So if something is all dry, then it's no effect being had. If it's all wet, then the original signal disappears and just the effect plays. Let's hear how this sounds. Now we can hear a bit better how that reverb effect adds an echo and space to our sound on the piano. Let's keep examining some of these effects and the different controls that can change how that effect is processed. We talked about the dry and wet signals, and typically what you're going to want to do is edit just the wet signal first and then edit the dry signal back in to get a better sense of what the effect is doing. Let's give a listen. So that's pretty strong. Maybe we'll bring it down a bit. That sounds better. Now let's bring the dry back in. Little too much. That sounds great. Now let's talk about the size control for our reverb. This essentially affects how large or small the room, quote unquote, our sound is being played in. Let's give it a shot. Let's make the size as big as it can be and listen. Now let's bring it all the way down and compare. Right now the difference is subtle because we don't have a ton of wet signal, but the more wet signal that we have, the more apparent the change in size will be. Next we have the reverb's decay time, which is the amount of time it takes for the reverb to reach a decibel level of minus 60 decibels, which, for all intents and purposes, is inaudible. Let's think of this as the length of the reverb effect. A higher decay time means a longer effect, and a shorter decay time means a shorter effect. Let's keep in mind that if the decay time on anything is too long, and the reverb sounds are played back to back or in quick succession, those reverb effects aren't going to go away for a while, and so they'll start to play over one another and interfere, which makes a muddy and droning effect. We can see this effect for ourselves. Now, let's put the decay time all the way up and give a listen. Even after I've paused, you can still hear that decay going on. We cut it down, and it barely sticks with us after we stop playing. Finally, here, the stereo knob is good for moving the reverb into new spaces relative to the listener, similar to pan. This is especially helpful when two reverb effects from different instruments or sounds are similar and interfering with one another. By using the stereo knob to move the reverb's output to different sides of the mix, then those sounds can exist at the same time without having as many bad effects on one another. Well, that's all for today, and next time we're going to cover basic workflow in FL Studio, as well as tips for creating music faster. This is Mirium Music, signing off.